welcome to the Samson Strength Coach Collective podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Grasso. We are joined today by Sean Conaty.
You got it.
All right,
Yep.
all right, cool. He is the head men's basketball strength coach at Oregon State University, 31 years old. We were just talking about that. Very impressive. He is from Monticello, New York. Monticello, not cello. He's got his master's from Springfield College in strength and conditioning, a bachelor's from East Carolina University in exercise science. He is strength and conditioning coach certified through the CSCCA and certified strength and conditioning specialist through the NSCA. There we go. I told you I was going to mess that up. He has some certifications through the USA weightlifting, USA track and field. He is certified. He's a certified sports nutritionist. He also has a certification FMS level 1, level 2, and Y balance. And he is also reflexive performance reset certified, RPR. Just to give you a quick run through of all the places he's been. So I'm going to have to kind of move my sheet up here. So we got ECU, Fitness Quest, back to ECU, IMG, Merrimack, Springfield, Buffalo Bills, Springfield, Eastern Michigan, Christopher Newport University. For those of you who don't know where that is, like myself, I was in Newport News, Virginia, Eastern Michigan, Buffalo, and now he is at Oregon State. So Sean, welcome. We appreciate you doing this on short notice. I'm sure a lot of the listeners are probably wanting to hear a little bit about your story and how you ended up where you are. I do think it is very interesting that you're 31 years old and you have had the path that you have had. Obviously, we know some, similar people here, and I think it's great to have you on here to provide some insight as to how you can go about and with some of the things that you've had to navigate. But before we get into all that, if you want to just take us through, where this thing all started back in the streets of Monticello when you decided you wanted to be a head strength coach, to where you are now. I'd love to hear it.
Awesome. No, I appreciate it. Yeah, like you said, I'm from Monticello, New York, so upstate New York. The story, really, I was a basketball and a soccer player growing up and was a real undersized, player on all my elementary teams, modified teams, everything. But I mean, this has just been who I've been since I've been a kid. Like literally in fifth grade, I bought an ab wheel. I'd wake up at 6 a.m. before fifth grade. I'd watch SportsCenter. I'd do the ab wheel. I'd do this push-up routine that I made up, would go shoot free throws, and just saw the value in trying to be the best version of myself, trying to be the best athlete I could be. And obviously the physical side was really what I was lacking. So I really dove into that. Went down to UNC basketball camp in elementary school, and they had a strength coach come out and warm us up before basketball camp. And so at like 10 years old, I was like, that's what I want to do. Like, it just clicked for me, because that's who I kind of was. I was into, the fitness side of things. I was into sports, but as soon as I saw that, I was like, okay, that's what I want to do. So, you talk about my career path. I was fortunate then from like 10 years old to kind of see my future and realize this is how I want to navigate and move forward. But with that, I've had 5 knee surgeries, all from soccer. So starting at 14 years old, tore my ACL, sitting out freshman year of basketball. Do a full rehab process. Next year, same thing, tear it again. I'm sitting out with basketball. And so my junior varsity basketball coach was really, I have to edit that.
Lights out.
Lights Those are going to cut every 15 minutes, so we might have to edit that.
No worries. We got to get someone to come in and just wave their hand in the air.
Right. Freshman in high school, that my junior varsity coach was really the one to go all in and push me toward the weight room. So, I'm still part of the basketball team. I'm rehabbing from knee surgery, but instead of just sitting at practice, running the scoreboard, he would tell me like, hey, get in the weight room, like go, at 14, 15 years old, he realized like, you got to put your energy elsewhere if you can't play basketball right now. So I got really into lifting. That was probably super illegal to have a 15-year-old unsupervised in a high school weight room. But yeah, after 5 knee surgeries, 5 return to plays, 5, physical therapies, all that, I really got into lifting. And so going to college, instead of going and trying to find a school to, continue either playing basketball or soccer, playing days were over. I wanted to start my career as a strength coach. So freshman year, I got a personal trainer certification. That seemed like the first right thing to do. Like, let me just start coaching, right? So general population, clients at the rec center, I'm coaching, I'm getting reps. I'm volunteering in the varsity weight room. So I'm getting that actual hands-on strength and conditioning experience. I was a research assistant in the biomechanics lab. So kind of like all the different avenues of this profession, I got experience at all through college to kind of navigate, okay, do I want to be a college strength coach? Do I want to be private sector? Do I want to be a lecturer, a teacher, research, all the different things. I got that, experience. And then like my first, bigger internship, I went out to Fitness Quest 10 in San Diego, where it's a private gym that trained general pop clients as well as professional athletes.
Right.
So for me, that seemed like, okay, that's the next move for me because I'm a personal trainer working with General Pop, but I'm interning in the varsity weight room with athletes. So let me go do this internship across the country where I get to kind of do both on a higher level. So I learned a lot from that. I'm back to ECU. I needed to do one more internship to complete my undergrad. And so I went to IMG Academy down in Florida. And so the move there was, I experienced kind of small private sector at Fitness Quest 10. And I was like, let me experience like a bigger private sector experience at IMG Academy, where, we did work with pro basketball, pro football, but then all of the different youth camps and all of their development teams and whatnot. And so that was really run more like a college weight room. Like that experience was very much more like a collegiate experience than a private sector experience. And that really resonated with me and made me realize, okay, maybe this is more the route I want to go than in like a team setting, And so I went to Springfield College in Massachusetts for my master's degree. The way Springfield is set up, your first whole year, you're basically like in an interview process to try and get a GA for your second year. And you got to intern at Springfield, but then you also got to do an internship, somewhere else.
Sure.
Well, the way it worked out, I was set up to intern at Springfield in the spring. So I'm like, okay, well, I'm moving up to Massachusetts. I'm not just going to sit around and I've been coaching now for like 4 years. I'm not going to coach for a semester. Right. So I went and would drive to North Andover to Merrimack College and intern there a few times a week while I was still taking classes at Springfield, just to continue to intern, be with different coaches, Coach Kamal, Coach Jimmy McGuire, and just continue to get reps, continue to build my network, continue to learn from other people. And the other part of that is, I knew I wanted to be a GA at Springfield, but my internship was set up for the spring. I knew that I wanted to intern in the NFL, which would have started in March. It would have cut that experience short. So I'm like, okay, the interview process is going to be real small for me. So let me intern with these Springfield grads throughout the fall at Merrimack so they can vouch for me. Then I'll do a great job at my Springfield internship. And then I'll go to the NFL where I'm going to work for more Springfield grads, right? So I can get like the best recommendation to hopefully get that GA position. Yeah. So that's what happened. Then I do Merrimack in the fall, Springfield, January through March. Then I leave for the Buffalo Bills. And I was with the Bills from March until August through preseason, get the GA position at Springfield. So I'm back at Springfield for my second year. And that's the first time I'm running my own teams. And so I'm programming for 4 different teams. I'm like only a year or two older than some of the athletes that I'm coaching. That was the first time I grew out the beard just to try and like look a little older and different. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so I had a phenomenal year. I love Springfield. Like that's some of my closest friends, the best curriculum, like that was phenomenal for me. But still to graduate with my master's, I needed one more internship. And that's what brought me out to Eastern Michigan for the first time. Coach Ron McKeefrey had just taken over at Eastern. He's a master strength coach. I've, have been all these different coaching trees and experiences, but I never was kind of with anyone in that CSCCA kind of fraternity. And so I knew I wanted to intern under him to kind of get my foot in the door to do the CSCCA practicum and get that certification and everything like that. So that brought me out to Eastern, intern for the summer. He kept me on part-time throughout the fall and was just like pumping me up, trying to get me my first full-time job, because at this year it's like, 5-6 years in the field of all, voluntary intern, unpaid intern, paid intern, GA, part-time, like you're climbing the ranks. You're right there. You're just trying to get your foot in the door for your first full-time job. But after, a full fall at Eastern, then it was January 2015, got my first full-time job down at Christopher Newport University, Newport News, Virginia. And that was, again, it was my first full-time job, phenomenal experience for me because now I'm programming for 10 teams. Yeah. And so again, just getting quality reps, on the floor, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., just nonstop coaching, like really just, cutting your teeth with that. So I was there for a year and a half. And then, Eastern Michigan, Coach McKeefrey left. They restructured the department a little bit and had a basketball position back at Eastern. And so the strength staff that I was with was still there. The basketball staff that I was working with was still there. So they called me to come back and take over for basketball. So I made the jump back to Eastern, my second full-time spot, working with the basketball program, was there for 3 seasons. And then the job at Buffalo opened up, and I was with Buffalo basketball, but I was also director of a department. So now I just, was kind of ticking boxes in my career. Like number one, I just wanted to be a strength coach. You know how oversaturated the field is. Like you just want to get a job. That's what CNU gave me. It gave me the opportunity. From there, I knew I wanted to work Division I basketball. So I got back to Eastern Michigan. I got to check that box. I knew I wanted to work high major basketball, but I also knew that I wanted to be a director and get that leadership experience as well. And just when, you navigate your career, like the job I'm in now as head men's basketball strength coach at Oregon State, like I'm tied in with the basketball staff. I don't oversee a staff at all. And so the way I saw my career going, I knew that this is where I wanted to be, but I also knew I wanted that director experience. And so Buffalo provided that opportunity where I was able to kind of make a move and become director of Olympic sports at Buffalo right after my Eastern Michigan position, still working with the basketball program, but now getting that leadership and administrative experience. Did that for 2 years. And then this, opportunity presented itself and moved across country. And now here I am at Oregon State.
Yeah. New York guy all the way out.
Yeah.
The West Coast. That's always it. It's like, and so just to go back. So when was JC Hull? When did you guys cross paths? Like your first time in Eastern Michigan or your second? Because we're talking about somebody who was out of play. Oh, so he was there both times.
So JC and I got to Eastern at the exact same time as interns in May 2014. So we spent that full summer together. Again, I left then for CNU for about a year and a half. I come back and now JC is no longer the intern. He's the GA. And then I got to be, I was the full-time basketball strength coach, but I went right from living in Virginia to driving up to Michigan and moving in with JC and his dog Rocco. And, it was like fraternity days, me and JC.
Yeah, no, I remember all those times where JC would leave Connecticut and he'd be like, "Hey, could you watch Rocco?" So I would shoot over right from the university and I would go grab Rocco. We'd go on a walk or whatever. He's like the nicest, friendliest pit bull I think for sure ever actually existed.
I know, no question.
It's awesome. Yeah. So you want to talk about somebody who's, across, in a different location, totally different than where he's from. So obviously you're a New York guy out and on the West Coast now, out in Oregon too. So it's awesome. So I guess my question was just to clarify, in Buffalo, you oversaw the Olympic sport department. So you were working for the athletic department. Now over at Oregon State, obviously it's a little bit more of a, I guess football would be the example you could give where you are tied to the staff over there.
Exactly. Yeah. So the way Buffalo's department was set up is football was separated from Olympic sports. So you had head football strength coach, who was Matt Gildersleeve, right? He's now at Kansas. And then myself, who oversaw 3 assistants on the Olympic side. And again, kind of a unique opportunity where I'm working basketball at Eastern Michigan, and through some basketball connections, they put me in touch with the new basketball coach at Buffalo, Jim Weitzel, who was associate head coach under Nate Oates. When that staff went to Alabama, Coach Weitzel got promoted to the head coach. He calls me, I develop a relationship with him. So he brings me on board to be his basketball strength coach. But then just through the interview process and getting to meet the administration, that's when they said, we're going to make you director over everyone. So I was in a dual role where it was very much a basketball position where, I'm at every basketball practice, game, traveling with the team, setting up all their nutrition, at every staff meeting, watching film with them, meeting all the recruits. Like it's very much a basketball deal, but I still had the dual role where I'm overseeing a staff of 3, 2 varsity weight rooms, 350 plus student athletes, dealing with administration, dealing with budget, dealing with trying to restructure that department, because administration had their own ideas of how we should structure us for Olympic sports strength coaches. Me having seen the way we did it at Eastern Michigan and actually living through a few things, I realized, I was able to articulate to them, we're setting ourselves up for failure here. Let's try and restructure some of these positions, how we're allocating different team assignments, all that kind of stuff. And then, getting, a facelift on both weight rooms, getting more funding into nutrition, actually set up a fueling station, like all that type of stuff was cool for me to get that experience. And I loved it, but I knew the next step for me after Buffalo was, instead of kind of being pulled in 2 different directions, either go all in on more of that administrator leadership position or go all in on basketball. And again, going back to when I was a kid, this was the role that I wanted. Sure. And I knew that I needed somewhere along the way to get that leadership experience elsewhere.
Yeah. So that was because that was going to be my next question is like, what was your thought process in terms of your career trajectory? It's like, obviously you've alluded to the fact that at Buffalo, you probably have a little bit more job security, I guess would be the word.
Sure.
The fact that you are overseeing an Olympic sport department and obviously basketball as well, working for athletics, whatever the case may be.
Yep.
And I'm wondering, because I think now it's like, okay, well, you're under, you're living out across the way, right? You're on the West Coast and you're far away from home and you're, working in a situation where obviously you're tied to a basketball coach. So a lot of people would be fearful of that. I think a lot of people in the industry also understand that that's typically the way things work and you kind of got to do it. But so that, that answers my question, obviously, because you're saying, well, I knew what my priorities were. I knew what my goal was. And I have, I looked at the overarching theme of why I really got into this. And this was the position that I would wanted to obtain. So obviously staying at Buffalo wasn't necessary. It was a great stepping stone for you to then move and transition into that. So to kind of piggyback off that, when you first got to Buffalo and you said like, it was like, hey, listen, I've got some experience and some things that I think we can restructure. And like you said, some of the optics of, the facelift on the weight room and all that kind of stuff, that's fine. What were some of the other things that you felt you needed to do right away? Like what were some of the things that you thought were like the big shortcomings of the actual program itself and how you went about kind of restructuring that as, a new director, right? Like your first time kind of taking on a situation like that.
In my experience, the trickle down effect of how our industry is going, right? Where you got your first college strength coaches being in football, and then football is, your revenue sport that's making a lot of money, and they've got their own strength coach. And then that's kind of trickled down to other revenue sports with men's basketball, women's basketball, depending on where you're at, hockey, baseball, whatever it is. The very first priority I saw was women's basketball at Buffalo needed their own strength coach that was able to attend practices, travel with them, set up nutrition, do all the stuff that I did with the men, because there was an imbalance there. Mm-hmm. And when I first got to Eastern Michigan, I was working with both the men's and women's basketball program and trying to do both of those things for both programs, which it's an impossible job. That's when tough, yeah. both of them are on the road. Okay. Who are you traveling with? When both of them are practicing at the same time. Okay. Who are you going to be warming up? Like there's no consistency there. I think that's everything in our profession is like, we've got to provide value, but there has to be consistency. And if we get set up in a structure that's going to be inconsistent, we're just setting ourselves up for failure. So I've experienced that. We were able to make it a better situation at Eastern. I wanted to make sure when I was walking into the job at Buffalo that we weren't going to set ourselves backwards, that, we were able to provide that. So we're able to promote one of the assistants to have a higher level job and be with women's basketball and provide all those different services. We're able to bring on another assistant. And then again, you look at traveling, right? So your mid-major program.
Siri wants in. She wants in.
Siri has something to say about that. When you look at being a mid-major program, like at Buffalo, I was with men's basketball and volleyball. When I was at Eastern Michigan, I had both basketballs, women's soccer, and women's golf. Now, if I'm required to travel with basketball because it's a revenue sport, what happens to the training of the other teams when I'm on the road? Like how are we going to provide coverage for that? Mm-hmm. So the solution would be, okay, let's match that up with either you're coaching different teams that the schedule permits, or you set up your whole department where, okay, we have 2 positions that are travel positions, 2 positions that are like the job I had at CNU, where you're in the weight room, living in the weight room, and you're coaching. And so that's what we're able to do. We've got, at the time myself, who was traveling with basketball. We had another coach that was traveling with women's basketball, and we had 2 assistants that had the bulk of the sports that were the way I classified it, tier 3 sports, meaning they were primarily just weight room based, like your track and fields, your throwers, tennis was in there because they didn't do a lot of conditioning. But like, when you've got a field sport like soccer, basketball, baseball, right? If say you're lifting 3 times a week, you might have 2 other sessions a week, speed, agility, conditioning. So you're with them 5 days a week. But some of your sports that like track, you don't have to go out and do speed work with them. You don't have to go out and do conditioning with them. Like it's just purely a weight room based sport. So the time commitment to coaching them is significantly less than some of the other, what I would call the tier 2 team sports. And obviously very significantly less than your tier one revenue sports where, in a given day, you're out of practice, you're traveling, you're doing all these other things. So structuring the four of us, the human resources between the four of us appropriately so that we can have two positions travel and that there was minimal missed lifts with our teams that, like for volleyball, when I was leaving with basketball, we set up the schedule so there's only a handful of times where I'd have to miss a volleyball lift. But if that was the case, we did have strength coaches that their job was structured in a way that they were going to take the overflow, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Those are some good adjustments for sure. When you first got there, obviously fairly new situation going on. And I want to get into some of the, the physical training aspects, all the things that happen, right? Like, but before we do that, what were some of the major, if there were any, right? What were some of the major mistakes that you think might have been made on your end, things that you really needed to learn from in a new leadership role? And obviously you kind of already alluded to some of the thoughts that you had as to things that you did well and some of the adjustments you were able to make and why, some of the tiers you came up with. And I think those are all great. And we can dive into those a little bit more too, as far as like for those who are taking on new director roles, it's like, all right, well, how do we go about how do we convince the people that are hiring me that they have a problem they don't even know that they have, right? It's like, right. Hey, like we can provide more value to these athletes, whatever the case is. But when you first got there, yeah, what were some of the major mistakes that you felt like, not major, but just mistakes in general that you thought you needed to learn from?
I think when I first got there, when I first got there, I was the new guy, right? All the assistants had been at Buffalo for a long time, kind of knew the university, knew the athletic department, how things kind of, moved and whatnot. So I really relied on, I didn't want to come in and just shake everything up day one, even though I had my own ideas about how we should do things. I really sat back, did a SWOT analysis with them and really relied on them to, okay, here's where we're at, here's where our pain points are. And just relied on them a lot to kind of navigate where we were going to go. What I wish I did differently, though, is, because after seeing how we're doing it here at Oregon State, seeing how we've done it elsewhere, I think sometimes you just got to come in with a hard plan and stick to it, as opposed to having too many kind of cooks in the kitchen, if you will. You know what I mean? So there were certain things where all of our training philosophies were different. I said, that's awesome because we're a more diverse group. We've got, many ways to skin a cat. We're all going to be able to learn from each other. I thought that was great, but I think streamlining some of our processes, some of our systems earlier than what we did, I was there for 2 years. If we would have done that from year one, I look at the growth that we had from year one to year two, I think it would have just, exponential growth if we were able to change some things there. So that would be one. I think maybe pumping up your assistants and putting them in more leadership positions, getting them in front of administration more. The way that department ran was very much top down where, the AD is going to talk to the associate AD, the associate AD talks to me and I'm kicking the information up. So, my ultimate goal, especially when I'm leaving, is I want everyone that was under me to be able to move up. I want them to take on higher roles. Well, that's tough when the associate director doesn't really get any face time with an associate AD or the AD like I do. Like I'm the one that's communicating and pumping them up, but they don't have a lot of face time with them. And again, that's kind of how that administration ran itself. They said, no, we're going to know everything we need to know about strength conditioning through Sean. And so I had to kind of articulate that to the staff, but maybe going to bat more and just getting them in front of the administration more, getting them in front of those different experiences so that when time came and things got shaken up again, they're already more familiar with administration, familiar with the roles and duties to just more naturally progress into those different positions.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I do want to go back to the first point you made. And I think that, you say that you felt like it was a mistake to kind of maybe take as long as it took for you to kind of ramp things up and make some of the changes that you wanted to. But I think it's tough. I mean, you think about it like this, right? Like you obviously, at the beginning of the podcast, you talked specifically about all the places you've been, and every place you've been, you're a new guy. Right. So and I always thought, I always thought it was interesting when you come across interns, right, where they come in and they have a little bit more, I don't know if enthusiasm or juice or this aura about them where they want to feel like they have the autonomy to show you how good they are, how much they know, what they're capable of, the value they can provide. And like, not trying to criticize anybody, good or bad, like whatever it is, but like my interpretation and my perception as an intern, like I was always like, I'm going to keep my mouth shut for a good amount of time until someone like actually respects me enough to talk to me. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to pay attention as much as I possibly can, pick up as much as I possibly can. And then when the time is right, they'll let me know. And then I'm going to show them my capabilities. So now I think that's a good approach when you're an intern, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to be some sort of like just body taking up space. What I mean is just earn the right and the respect from your peers, obviously, as you enter into a new environment, which you have not been a part of, and you have no idea what's been going on. And even if you have some idea of what's been going on, you don't have the trust and the understanding and the actual connection with the human beings who have been there prior. So that's the most important piece, right? Like, where is that connection coming from? So I guess my point is, once you get into that, it's totally different when you're a director, though. When you're director, it's like, well, I need to kind of do this balancing act where like, I'm going to make sure that I'm patient. I don't want to have a complete overhaul of some of the things that have been done. I want to make sure that I'm also hearing the thoughts and visions and opinions of those who have been here, despite that the fact that I may be their superior. They obviously know the lay of the land much better than I do or whatever. So I don't know. I don't even know if I would consider that like a major mistake, but I understand what you're saying, though. It's like, well, it ended up, you only were there for 2 years. So in your mind, you're like, I wish I maybe could have ramped things a little bit faster, that kind of deal. But I do appreciate it. And I've worked for Boston. Like when I worked, when Matt King came in at UConn after Coach Klein left, he did the same thing. It was like, let me just listen to, it was actually JC and I were the only ones that were the two dudes just sitting in that auxiliary office. And we had no idea who was getting hired or what was going on. And, we're just sitting in there. We didn't even have a boss. Like we had no director of strength and conditioning. It was just myself. I was a paid intern at the time. And JC was like one of the only full-time assistants there. So, we're like, what's going on? Matt comes through and, he did a really good job of being like, all right, I don't know these two dudes. I really don't know what their deal is. They're just like here. So like, I'm going to, listen to them and hear what they have to say. And then, but also gradually implement some of the things that I think are important, blah, blah, blah. So no, I think that's a good piece. You know what I mean? I think that's something that's important for people to understand, is that like, there is sort of a earn the right, even as a director. I know you got to come in and make a splash, but right. Like you kind of see, what I'm saying, you know what I mean? No question. No. Yeah. You can't come in and I said that to the staff right away from day one. I can't come in and just overhaul everything. I've got to rely on those that have been there. But it's just, for me, looking back, only being there 2 years, it was the start of year 2 where like, I feel like the 350 student athletes could feel the difference. They could feel the momentum and everything building. And it's like, it just took a full year to get there. And truthfully, I took that job in June 2019. So we're cruising all summer, cruising through the basketball season. And then, March 2020 shut down with COVID. It was like, that's when it really hit me like, okay, guys, we got to get organized here, because like we need to make sure we have everything straightened out so that, number one, obviously we're taking care of our student athletes, but selfishly, like none of us wanted to lose our job, get furloughed, anything like that. So like, we need to be organized and be able to articulate our value, because if, when I took the job from the assistants telling me that like administration thinks we just like kind of cut the lights on in the weight room and we just hold down the weight room and this and that. So then my response when COVID happened is, well, what do you think? How are we going to justify them paying us from home if they think all we do is just sit in the weight room? Like, how can we still provide, value to our student athletes, to our coaches, support them? And so truthfully, like, I guess my plan coming in as director was to kind of have a slow process, gather information, build trust, and slowly change things. But man, COVID happened, and that solidified it. That was like, all right, here's our time where we really gotta get things organized. And again, I think that expedited our process in year 2. Yeah. Well, good on you for being humble enough and obviously having enough, showing enough vulnerability to obviously like listen to the assistants, but also, at the same time, you've earned the right to obviously, like, there's a reason that Buffalo, when in the interview, was like, hey, we'd like to bring you on as a director, not even just someone who's going to work. Like, you're going to come in and you're going to lead this crew. So that's a really fine line to kind of balance. And obviously you did a great job doing it. And obviously Oregon State noticed that. So that's awesome. Going back to the administration in Buffalo, what, you talked about trying to get more face time for your assistants. So obviously people who are in director roles, I think everybody's intention is to always develop, right? And I think that's obviously good. good, and that's the idea. But part of that development you mentioned would be getting more face time, getting your assistants in a position where they can obviously communicate to, the administration, maybe give the administration a different perspective on what you guys provide, right? Like you said, your assistants were like, I think these guys only think that we just turn the lights on and make sure that we hold open gym or whatever it is. But what do you think some of the value is for leaders and directors when they provide the opportunity for their assistants to express and articulate some of their thoughts to some of their superiors and some of the ones who they may not see on a daily basis? Like where do you see value in that from the perspective of the administrator and obviously from the perspective of the coach?
I just think you don't know what you don't know. You know what I mean? So like as a director, I'm in weekly staff meetings with administration where I'm going to bat for my assistants. I'm going back to bat for our department, laying out what our vision is, what we need. And so the assistants that don't sit in on it, if say we're looking for certain funding for nutrition or for new equipment or to send them to a different conference and it gets shot down, all they hear is that, administration's not giving it to us. They don't see me sitting there expressing the value in it, why we need it, or administration saying, we can't make it happen here, but this is what we're going to be able to do instead. Like all the little minutia that gets overlooked. Because I remember a very specific point where, one of the assistants just saying, man, administration they never come into the weight room. Like that's a problem. I've never seen them in the weight room. But my response is always like, well, have you been in their office? They say the same thing about academic people. Academic people have never been in the weight room. Okay. Have you gone and sat through a study hall with the athletes before? Like it goes both ways. And so you don't know what you don't know. And so I remember setting up a meeting where, administration said, look, we communicate through you. We're not communicating through everyone else. But I said, no, I want to bring an assistant in. I want him to be able to speak to you and whatnot. And we leave that meeting. I just looked at him. I was like, now you see what I've been going through. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so,
you see what I'm dealing with? You see what I'm dealing with?
I think that's so valuable because you start, I think you've got to be able to change your vocabulary based on the room that you're in. And so just getting them the opportunity to sit in front of suits and be able to communicate and articulate differently, and for them to be perceived as not in the shorts and a t-shirt guy, but like someone in an actual higher stature. I think that stuff is invaluable. And so, again, after 2 years, I started to set up those different opportunities for them, but it always stuck with me where I was like, man, because that really never happened for me. I just kind of stepped into this role. But after 2 years, I was like, that would have been something I would have continued to do basically if I was still there.
Yeah, that's really interesting, to be honest, because I think in a lot of cases, and I'm just as guilty as anybody else of being an assistant who criticizes, the suits as you alluded to, right? The administration and let's not beat around the bush. There's definitely times where the administration, and probably a lot of cases, right, is not providing the support or has different ulterior motives as to how they plan to, optically act as if they're providing the support, right? And there's a lot of manipulating that goes on, right? And I think I don't know if this podcast is the time to really get into the breakdown of like why these things actually happen and where some of our faults lie and in this whole fractured system. I've definitely touched on that before. We don't need to have this turn into that. But you mentioned a good point, right? It's like I want to be able to give my assistants the opportunity to understand a little bit more about them. And I think a lot of people say the same things like, all right, well, I never see the athletic director here in this weight room, or I never see, even the football coach. Like I don't ever see the football coach, or the basketball coach come by, or I don't see, and I've had a lot of coaches who, unfortunately after the fact, after they've, left the university or gotten fired, have said, you know what, I probably could have gone into their office too, though. Like you said, I probably could have made the effort to get to where I needed to go to actually try to extend and connect. And, it's not to say that it always works out well and that's always going to be, some sort of like saving grace, right? I think there's certain agendas out there and people do what they need to do. But I do think that value can be provided because it provides the assistant with a chance to obviously gain a little bit more respect from their peers in a way, right? It's like, like you said, you view him as more than someone who's just, putting a t-shirt on and going out there and yelling different exercises and trying to instruct. Right. I think at the end of the day, there's a responsibility, and you can tell me if you agree with this or not. Right. I think like yes, like I understand, like we've been talking for like a half an hour. We haven't even mentioned training yet, right? Because the idea is like I understand that like, yes, like the objective of the department, like what you provide is like, okay, we're going to provide this in terms of like their physical preparation. We'll get into some psychological stuff, maybe some technical work, some, tactical stuff. Like the coaches that we're there, right? But like the overarching responsibility, I think, of a coach and people who are working at universities and administrators is to provide experiences, right? So if providing experiences is what you would do for the student athlete and it's what you do for your assistants, right? I think the responsibility when it comes to trying to provide those experiences is to put them in situations where they are changing their perception of people, whether it be from a cultural perspective or from just a legitimate, job perspective. And then I think the other responsibility was probably the most important responsibility for the strength and conditioning coach, considering you're probably the most equipped to do it, is to provide education for everybody else in the building around what each one of their roles are. Because I think, to be honest with you, I think the strength and conditioning coach has a better idea of how the sport coach is actually providing value than the sport coach does. Like, I think you have a better understanding of like systems and how all of these things holistically come together. So I think that's part of the responsibility that you have. And I think a lot of strength coaches fall short there, where you're a director and it's like, well, I'm going to handle my department. It's like, well, your department would probably be better equipped if you provided some of that education to your sports medicine staff, your sport coaches, your team psychologist, your team doctor, right? Everybody has a little bit of understanding of your role and their role, right? And how it kind of fits in. Obviously, talking about things like, decentralized command, a little bit more belief in the commander's intent, like these types of things will probably, like I said, like I think that's the responsibility. And I think it creates a little bit more of a shared responsibility. I think there's less blame game going around because everyone kind of understands like, all right, like here's my role, what I mean? And this is his role. And here's how our roles overlap and complement and sometimes can compete with one another. Right. And when something goes wrong, which it inevitably will, here are the systems that we're going to use to rectify and provide solutions, right? Is that kind of like in a nutshell, very vague, you know what I'm saying? But like, is that in a nutshell, is that kind of the way you think?
How the different departments interact, overlap, how you guys need to collaborate, work together. And what's the overall mission for the athletic department? What are your top 3 things that you're trying to provide value to? What are the top 3 things that are going to say, okay, we're successful as a department, not just each individual sports team, not each department within athletics, but overall within athletics. And now everyone that's in a leadership position, how are we collaborating to reach these goals? But it goes back to the other thing, like what is your defined outcome? What is the defined goal and objective of how you're being perceived to bring value? We talk about it all the time when it comes to being a strength coach. And I think every job that I've had, there's been a different answer to that. But overall within athletics, everyone in a leadership position needs to know, okay, what's like the next right thing that we're doing to get us to this goal and communicating that, top down, across side, every way,
Yeah, no, for sure. That's awesome. And I think another point you make that I think is really interesting is you want your assistants to get in a room with higher level individuals because you want them to be able to communicate. And you think that as you alluded to, right, you said that your vocabulary needs to obviously have some sort of flexibility to it, right? I guess it is, for lack of better terms, right? Like the ability for you to talk the way you're talking with me, then go talk to your athletes, and then you're going to talk to somebody in administration, and you're going to talk to the basketball coach at Oregon State, right? Like these things all require different levels of vocabulary, different types of people that you're reaching, right? Different, educational systems, different ways of viewing things, different perspectives, right? And I think that, that's probably something that the strength coach at times can do the best. And sometimes it's what they do the worst, right? Like it just depends on who you're talking to, but I do think that's really interesting. I think that's probably what I would settle on. Like, I think providing experiences is the main driver behind what a university is supposed to provide. And I think the coaches, the administration, and the support staff are all part of that. Like you're providing an experience for the student athlete. Get the lights back on. And I think it's like, all right, so you're providing this experience, but what kind of experiences are we providing? Like, are we just providing an environment where like guys enjoy training? Like, that's fine. I think that's good. Yeah, like no doubt. But I don't think that that's anywhere near what you could be accomplishing given the resources that you have at Oregon State, Buffalo, UConn, whatever. Like these are like legitimate institutions, right? With enough resources to, and obviously support some of these experiences. And I was explaining, I think the most special thing about what you do is you get kids from all over the country, potentially all over the world. Right. And I think you're getting kids with different perceptions of different people from different walks of life. Right. And obviously I think a goal right now for everybody in the world, right, we're all trying to achieve some form of unity, maybe not everybody, but we're trying to, right? Like that's the idea, is to get to a point where we have better understanding of each other. And I think that's the coolest part about the experience that you can provide is you're a dude from New York, right? Yep. You've been down in Florida, you've been across the way in California, you've been in Newport News, Virginia, you've been in Michigan, right? So Buffalo, it's like you've been all over the place and you figured out a way to obviously create some robustness in your ability to communicate with people and obviously provide these experiences. So now you're put in a leadership position where you can say, hey, I'm going to take a kid from, maybe somebody from Florida, right? And he's going to come up here to Oregon. He's going to play basketball. Maybe he has a perception about people who live in Oregon or whatever. And or maybe he has a perception about people from Monticello, New York. You know what I mean? And I'm going to change his perspective because I'm going to provide him with a good experience. Like, I think like at the end of the day, like that's probably the best thing. Like he walks away from that university thinking, you know what, man, I met some really good people. They did some great things for me. They extended themselves. They provided me with some great value. My life is different. It's better. My perspective is different. It's better. Right. Like, I think, you know what I mean? Like, is that kind of what you feel at the crux of it? Like, this is
you hit the nail on the head. I mean, that's my favorite part about this profession. That's my favorite part about sports. Like, the strength journey I've been on, I've lived in 8 different states. So yeah, regardless of the different institutions and seeing things done differently or whatever, but yeah, you talk about the different geographical regions, the different people that you're exposed to and that you get to know and interact with. I mean, those experiences are the best experiences that you can have in life. And again, back to your point about strength coaches being able to change their vocabulary. How many of us have ran a 6 a.m. football group and then a 7:30 women's rowing group and then a 8:30 men's soccer group? So you've got, your football group that you got to bring the energy and you're communicating a certain way, but then an hour later you got women's rowing. Like you got to be a little bit different person. Then an hour later you might have a men's soccer or a women's tennis where the majority of the team is from overseas. You got to communicate. So, before, most professionals have even ate their breakfast, we've kind of switched things up 3 different times, and, and so like, that's a skill. And then, so again, the next step I think is, talking to administration, talking to sport coaches, sports medicine, and being able to continue to hone that skill.
Yeah. And now, so you're at Oregon State now, obviously. And, you were like, before we got going, you were like, hey, like I took this job back. Was it September you took the job?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
September. So you're like smack dab right in the middle of preseason, right? Like it's time. It's like showtime. You know what I mean? Basketball season's right around the corner. And, obviously you're still in basketball season now. We're about to get into like the real heavy hitters, right? What month are we in? February? Yeah. So it's like, it's about that time. So now, give us some of the given everything that we just talked about, some of those particular topics. Now, when you go into your experience at Oregon State and your first, like, I know it's probably a little early right now. You probably haven't had time to just like settle and like understand and reflect at all, but this is where we're going to do it at 6:41 Eastern time, right? On a random, what is it? Thursday night, right? Like this is where I want you to kind of reflect on like, okay, you took some experience from Eastern Michigan and Buffalo. Now you're here at Oregon State. You're in a position where it's like, bam, I made it. I got it. Like, this is where and here's how I'm going to go about doing it. Talk to us about some of the things you've been able to do, some of the things you haven't been able to do. They could be specific to training. They could be specific to your relationship with the guys, the coaches, the administration, whatever it is, like good and bad, and what you kind of, how you've navigated some of the challenges.
Man, it's been a whirlwind. Going back to August, I get offered the job. I just finish up my off season at Buffalo, so we just wrap up the off season. Guys are about to go home for 2 weeks, and I got to bring the guys in and let them know that I'm leaving. And so, I went from interviewing at Oregon State to flying back to Buffalo to the next morning flying to Brazil for 10 days to be with my fiance and her family, to flying back to Buffalo to tell the guys that I was leaving, pack up my stuff. And then the 2 of us drove across country, 4 days, 10 hours a day out here to start. I had 1 week of training before we went into preseason. And yeah, I mean, literally the way I feel, I got my hands on the reins right now. And I'm just holding on till the off season. Like this is very similar to when I went back to Eastern Michigan for the first time, because I went back to Eastern Michigan in August. I got to Eastern Michigan, and the next day we flew to Bahamas for our foreign tour, and then had a 4-week training block and went right into preseason. So that whole year, I'm very big on like how we do things, you know what I mean? Not just teaching them what we're doing and maybe it's a little different, but like how we do it's extremely important. But when you get thrown in those situations, it's very tough to really lay that groundwork. So that's why I say I feel like you're just holding on for dear life till April comes. And that's how I felt at Eastern. We got through the year, really built great relationships, got guys invested in training. It wasn't the best product, just you're kind of making do with what you've got. But as soon as that season was over, I knew, okay, now all of a sudden it's April. Like now it's my time to really lay the foundation of how we're going to do things, what we're about, build that true weight room culture to match the basketball culture and get things moving. And we're able to do that at Eastern. And I tell the staff here the same thing. Like that's exactly how I feel. It's not too dissimilar in that Eastern Michigan, we had so many transfers, like with the portal and everything. We had a whole team made up of guys that were from all over the place that it took a long time for them to truly come together as a team and understand how we do things as a team. And now here at Oregon State, for the first time, the staff took all these different transfers. And so we have a bunch of guys that have seen it done so many different ways. We're trying to get them to come together as a team, get to understand how we want everything to be done. And so we're doing the best we can right now. It's been a tough year, but similar, again, back to Eastern, it's like just integrating myself with the coaching staff, integrating myself with the players, slowly kind of back to the Buffalo example with my staff, slowly making different changes, but knowing that, okay, I've got all this knowledge and I've kind of assessed everything for the last 6 months, but come April, this first off season, it's going to be a huge foundation for us moving into year two. Year one kind of is what it is. Year two is really, I think, when we can build something special.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, it's got to be super challenging. And like you said, you're kind of just like hanging on, right? It's like I've gotten in here. It's like, all right, I got the job. I need to like make sure that like I'm doing right by everybody and it's in the best, best capacity that I possibly can. Got a ton of new faces around here. I'm a new face, right? Like I'm trying to figure this out. So yeah, no, that's super challenging, man. And so you mentioned going to Brazil. You kind of threw that. What was Brazil? Just like it was a vacation, or are you going out there?
That's where my fiance is from. So we had that whole trip.
Oh.
I mean, long story short, we were supposed to fly out in June 2019, but that's when I got offered the Buffalo job. So we scrapped it, moved to Buffalo, and she's like, all right, we'll go out in March after basketball season. And coronavirus happens. And then so we're thinking COVID's going to be, it's 2 weeks to slow the spread. So we rebooked it for August 2020, but we're still in lockdown. So then we're like, all right, let's go at the end of this basketball season. Basketball season finishes. And then like March, April 2021 last year, all of a sudden it's the Brazilian variant. And so then we pushed it to the end of August. And then, this Oregon State staff is flying me out and really want me to join the team and everything. And then she's looking at me, she's like, we are not missing this big. So it worked out perfectly, where literally I flew across country, flew back to Buffalo the very next day as we went down to Brazil. So that was a great little reprieve, because you knew things were about to get crazy and get to be with a family and have a little downtime. But man, it was, we flew back from Brazil to Buffalo, and it was just a couple of days worth of packing up the place, getting everything set, and just moving cross country.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it was like you kind of like breeze past, like brush past it. So I was out in Brazil, and then then I'm going over to like, whoa, Brazil. I'm like, Buffalo and Brazil are like two completely different places. I would imagine. No offense to anybody from Buffalo and all, Bill's Mafia, right? We don't want to, no offense, but that's awesome. So we got a few minutes left, so I do want to make sure we get into some things here that will help some of the listeners. And obviously we've talked about some specific concepts of like how you can integrate some leadership roles into taking new positions, and how you kind of deal with the concept of having some assistants who've been there prior, and how you've gone through and kind of, been able to implement some of your thoughts right away while, respecting the thoughts of others at a few different places. Right. So obviously you've got a certain perspective on strength and conditioning in general, right? This has been a lifelong dream of yours. You are now in a position where you're seeing it a little bit more. I feel like, I don't know if the reflection process is always easiest, like while you're in it. Obviously it's not, but I don't know like how much it happens as you're moving around from place to place, you know what I mean? But obviously you're starting to like see things and like absorb things that you are really like, okay, I understand this, and I didn't understand this 10 years ago, but now I do. You know what I mean? Yeah. So what are some of those things about strength and conditioning that you feel like you understand now as far as like the industry, and, you know, maybe some good and some bad, and like how ways that you think we can continue to improve moving forward for some of the coaches out there?
I think first and foremost, you really got to, same way we like program for sports, right? Start with the sport, reverse engineer it. Start with where you want your career to go. Like what's the pinnacle, and then work your way backwards. And then all of a sudden the path and the steps that you need become a lot more clear to you. And the decisions don't, become as, I was joking with some of the staff. Like, I feel like our careers are kind of like that game in Squid Game where they're walking on the glass. Where it's like you take a step, the glass is good. You take a step, you break the glass, you fall. Like that's kind of like, some of our careers, you know what I mean? And so when you work your way backwards though, and you have a clear end goal in sight, the different choices and decisions you make to navigate your career become a lot clearer to you, even if they're not clear to other people. Like I definitely went against the grain with a lot of my career choices, taking my first full-time job at a Division III school and turning down a Division I assistant. Everyone said that was a mistake, but to me, it made sense. Like all things like that. I think when you look at the end and work your way backwards, that's going to help you out with your career. But for the industry as a whole, man, I've been thinking like some of the different jobs that I've had are so different. Like it's almost two different. It is two different roles, but it's almost like two different positions. Like even being here, our Dobo, we were joking. He was like, we're like packing snack bags and doing class checks and everything. He's like, did they teach you this in strength and conditioning school? And I'm like, they didn't teach me, I only use like 20% of my strength and conditioning stuff with what I'm doing on a daily, you know what I mean? Like there's so much other stuff. But my point is all of us in the profession talk about how can we get the profession better? How can we, I think, again, what's your definition of making the profession better? And then I think what coaches need to do a better job of is either getting more diverse experience or reaching out to other people with more diverse experience, and not talking so much on the X's and O's of training, but talk about what is the logistics and structure of that department. What are the pain points of that department? What are some issues that they're running into? Because every single person's situation is different and every job is so different. So if you want to talk about how we can make the profession better and the industry better, do you really understand the industry? Do you understand the full gamut of what we're dealing with? Because a lot of people don't. They only see what their own personal issues are. And then they want to talk to a strength coach from across the country and just talk training, which is fine. That's what we all love. But even in the Pac-12, like every organization is so different that you all of a sudden, when you get into those leadership positions, you realize like what you're up against or how, certain things are structured and maybe where it's heading, where it's not heading, things along those lines. But again, I'll just reiterate, like everyone's situation is so unique. And how about we appreciate the uniqueness of that situation and figure out what's good and what's bad about it, so that when we do get put in positions, when we do get pumped up into leadership roles, or, when we do get associate AD positions where we're overseeing actual strength departments and we're, to me, that's how we're bettering ourselves and lasting longer in our careers. When we do get put in those positions, we're so much more equipped to fully grasp what the state of the industry is and how we want to shape it.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's a great point. And I think that goes to exactly what you said before. You have a flexible vocabulary, but you have flexible skills. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's the idea of, like you said, working with different sports, working with different experiences, different situations, different challenges, right? Like the circumstances are always going to be different. And like, I agree, like there's certain positions I'm like, dude, that doesn't even sound like it's in the same profession. You know what I mean? It's like the one I've been working in, right? And then like someone would say the same thing about my position somewhere else, right? It's like, it really is and I think that's like the good and the bad about the industry is like the word like sport performance itself is so vague. And like, so at times, like you said, you get that saturation and you get a lot of, kind of like minutia and some nonsense and whatever, but then it's like, you get all of these different perspectives and these different situations. And then like everyone is at a different stage in terms of like their journey, whether it's a university, an organization, a company, whatever. Everybody's at a different stage in the journey of like finally valuing physical preparation, or just like, just like understanding like, okay, like what can I do to like preserve some integrity with the investment that I've made in my student athletes and the people who are going to support them and guide them and yada, yada. So yeah, I think it's, being conscious of that is a great point. But
well, you see this all the time, right? I mean, I can think of a few examples where you've got a head football coach that transitions into being an athletic director, right? When you're a head football coach, that comes with a certain level of power, authority, responsibility. You're sitting in certain meetings. You kind of understand that a lot of the revenue of the athletic department is going to roll through you and what you're, so you've grasped what's going on. And so you transition into actually just running the whole show. Bob Aleo's the first coach that I could think of a bunch of years ago saying, the next step for strength coaches is to transition into being that associate AD that's the one overseeing the strength coaches, and as opposed to an associate AD that has doesn't have the real life experience of understanding what we do on a daily basis. Let's, graduate as we get older into those positions where we can actually lead and run. And so to me, it's the same thing. I don't see why, with our skill set and with the amount of people that we impact, if we keep being more and more professional and continuing to push the envelope forward, I don't see why we don't have more associate athletic director positions, AD position, all these kind of things. To me, that's where we're headed. It's such a young profession, but 20 years from now, the back end of our career, I don't see why that's not the norm.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. No, that's a great point. Well, Sean, we'll wrap up here. I want to leave it on that point, man. I think that is the idea, right? Like, let's provide some insight as to like what we could be, right? Like, let's not just take a look at and, complain about like what we are right now. And of course, like you said, identifying what those actual problems are is super important. But, you obviously have a passion for this industry, you have a passion for this craft, and you figured out a way, at least in the short time that I've been talking to you, obviously this is our first time really getting to know each other. You have a lot of the qualities that you've talked about wanting to develop in your assistants and wanting to develop in other people that you come across, whether it be coaches or players, whatever the case is, you obviously have yourself, right? Like that's something that you've taken a lot of pride in. Say, hi, like I'm going to be this guy so that I can demand this of others and expect this of others, and hopefully instill this quality within others or qualities within others. And yeah, I think that the light's going out for the last time. I think it's like, all right, you know what? Like we're not even going to like, at some point they're just like not going to turn back on.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
all right, like, it's time to wrap up the podcast.
Cut to black.
Yeah, I get it. Well, if you can, Sean, just if you want to, like, obviously you've outlined some things that you think should be possible for strength coaches moving forward, as far as moving into administrative roles, creating more unity, cohesion, whatever the case is. What are some resources that you can provide our listeners with that you think may have helped you or may help others, whether it be books, podcasts, or just people in general that you think that they should reach out to? If they want to reach out to you, where can they reach you at? If you want to just provide some of that insight.
I think the single best thing I did when I was at Eastern, not even I did, but we did as a department at Eastern Michigan, when I was there, we held a MAC strength and conditioning clinic where all the strength coaches and departments from our whole league came together, and we didn't talk training. We just talked what I'm talking about. What's everyone's department structure like? What's everyone's salary pool like? What's job responsibilities, sport team assignments, everything. And like, we really got understanding of, all 12 universities, how vastly different they are. Okay. This university is in the same conference and the same state as us, but you don't get a salary bump due to inflation, 2% every few years like we do. You've been there 10 years and your salary stayed the exact same. Like you learn all these little things. And so that was a tremendous help for me then going to Buffalo, because it was in the same conference where now I knew the whole lay of the land of the conference, and we want to be different than everyone else. Well, here's what they're doing here. Here's how we can do it here. And part of that too was being with basketball when you travel. It just gives you a huge opportunity where you really get to know every basketball strength coach, when you're on the road or when they come to you. Same thing here in the Pac-12 is, if we're going to travel, last week we're at Utah and Colorado, make it a point just to chop it up with every strength. Like, to me, the relationships and real world, relationships that you can build from that are phenomenal. We just played Cal yesterday, and strength coach and I went out for coffee and just got to chop it up about what's going on there, what's going on here. Like nice. That type of stuff, especially if you're working in a sport like basketball or football or somewhere where you are traveling, those connections with those that are in your league, those universities are probably most similar to your circumstance, but there still is so much difference and variance in that. So kind of getting to know that is like the number one thing I can suggest for people.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Where can people find you if they want to reach out to you? Social media, whatever the case is. What do you got?
Pretty much Conaty, Sean, CONATY, SEAN. That's pretty much my handle on anything on social media. So yeah, you guys can reach out to me there.
All right. And you mentioned fiance. Did you get married yet, or
3 months? 3 months.
3 months.
Yep.
All right. Well, I'll definitely check in before then. We're gonna send you some Samson gear. Maybe you could wear that underneath your tux.
There you go. I appreciate. Give it to her. Something borrowed.
Yeah. Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, Sean, we really appreciate you hopping on. Any final thoughts that you want to leave the listeners with?
No, I just really appreciate the dialogue. Really good chopping it up with you, and keep it up. Keep up these conversations with other strength coaches.
Yeah, definitely, will do, and I'll let you know when this podcast comes out for sure. But yeah, I'll text you once we get off here. But I got to get some address for you. We're gonna send you some gear and stuff like that. Awesome. But again, thank you, Sean, and for everybody else, goodbye.